I'm Paul Amos, founder of The Redeemed. The Redeemed is a community of men that was built so that we could help with men in their difficulties and their triumphs over those difficulties. Today, we're back with the Redeemed Man podcast, and we're here with a very special guest and a very special host. For the first time, I'm going to be turning over the hosting duties to our new director of The Redeemed, Nate Dewberry. Please welcome Nate as he comes in to lead us in this very special topic.
Paul, thank you so much. It's exciting to be on here today and so excited about the guests we have with us. We have a chaplain who is currently serving in the United States Army, and just due to security reasons, protect him and his family and protect the stories that he shares today, we're not going to call his name. Appreciate you guys understanding that, but we're so thrilled to have him with us today, and welcome to the show.
Hey, thanks for having me, Nate. Really quite an honor to be able to chat with you guys.
Awesome. I know you have an extremely busy schedule, so thank you for taking time out of it. We want to start out first by asking you a question that we ask all of our guests, and that question is, what does redemption mean to you?
Yeah, well, I believe in the context of eternity. Redemption means everything, and I would go as far as saying that you could get everything wrong in life, but if you get redemption from the one who can truly redeem, that is the Redeemer, then eternally you got everything right. And so what does redemption mean to me? I believe it is the process of being transformed by the one who is able to redeem, and that is Jesus.
Awesome. Thank you for sharing that. Can you tell us a little bit about your own transformation and what redemption was like for you personally?
Yeah, that's a loaded question. Starting out with, I guess, just how I came to know Christ, maybe. My parents took me to church at a young age, and that's how I would say I cognitively or intellectually began to know who Christ is and who Jesus is. But the process of knowing Christ in a personal relationship and transformation, that's a journey that, just like any relationship, I'm still on even today, right? But the relational journey for me, started when I was in college, when I surrendered my life to Christ and was baptized.
Awesome. Well, thank you so much for sharing about that time in college. Can you tell us a little bit about what transpired when in your season in college and how you ended up being a chaplain? I know there's quite the process to serving in chaplaincy, and so how did you end up feeling called to do what you currently do today?
Yeah, well, the abridged version, the kind of the shortened version, is I commissioned from West Point, the United States Military Academy up in New York. Served for 6 years and some change, and ended up transferring over to the chaplain candidate program. It's an interesting program where you can kind of just act as a job shadowing, essentially, a chaplain once a month. And so went to seminary, youth pastored, and applied to get back in active duty. But that's kind of the abridged version. I don't even know if you want, but the real meaty version, if you will, is probably what we're most interested in.
Yeah.
So after high school, I was just a junior, senior in high school. I came out of a very challenging home life. My parents were divorced, and people will ask, why did you go to West Point? And my kind of cookie cutter response to folks is typically, well, it was the best leadership opportunity for me at that time in life. But the reality is that I wanted to get away. I wanted to blaze my own path and do something, just radically different. So West Point was an option for me to kind of get away from a challenging life situation. So I played baseball up at West Point and tried to keep my head above water academically. And eventually started this ministry called I Am Second, West Point. And so I had connected with a dear friend of mine, Chris Pleckenpole, who is actually now a pastor down in Texas. And he helped me kind of launch this ministry on campus. And that was a time in life that I'll come back to later on, where I really found fulfillment, purpose, and meaning in life when I was in college leading that ministry. So after graduation, I found myself in the Army, which was kind of ironic because I thought I was going to be a pro baseball player, even going to a military academy. And but when that wasn't in the deck of cards for me, I found myself in the Army, and went to Ranger school and airborne school, basically learning how to fall out of an airplane like a lawn dart and not get hurt. But over the course of serving in the military, I found myself in the Middle East on a deployment. And for me, it was a challenging deployment. A relationship that I was in at the time deteriorated. I had a friend die. I struggled with acute post-traumatic stress coming back, and truly did not see the purpose of living. Was very depressed and very much suicidal. And a dear friend of mine, who happened to be a chaplain, he was my chaplain at the time, he asked me how I was doing coming back from deployment, and I was honest with him. He and his family actually decided to invite me to live in their home for several months and help me get back to mental and spiritual stability. So I was very unhappy in the Army. I was self-reflecting, and I was thinking to myself, like, when was a time in my life I was most content, most certain, most fulfilled? And that was, in fact, the time where I was leading that college ministry at the military academy. And so I started to ask myself, how do I get back to spiritually leading college-age, young adult, life stage servicemen and women? And so that was kind of the progression of me starting to contemplate getting out of active duty into the reserves as a chaplain candidate. I met my wife, was married to her within 6 months. Not saying I recommend that progression for everybody, but for us, like, we knew. So anyways, so I was working as a full-time youth pastor, a seminary student, and several years later, one baby later, I was qualified and accepted to serve as an active duty chaplain. So kind of a cool asterisk to that story is when I got my first assignment as a chaplain, I called my chaplain buddy, the guy who basically helped save my life during that time of depression. And I told him where my wife and I were being assigned to. And ironically enough, he and his family had just received assignment orders to that exact same duty location. So currently now
That's
I serve
awesome.
about 3 miles away from my chaplain buddy who saved, I would say, my life in a dark season. So I guess a story of redemption in itself.
Chaplain, that's amazing to hear kind of your journey and how you ended up in the chaplaincy. And it's amazing the people God places in our life to draw out the purpose He has for us. And it really sounds like that interaction that you had was not only life changing, but also really helped keep you from making the wrong life choices at that point in time with the difficulty that you were facing.
Yeah, I mean, there is no doubt that there have been influential and very key people in my life at very needy times in my life that have helped keep me on the right path, or
Yeah.
on a path that's not destructive.
Yeah, for sure. So I have to go back to, you mentioned the quick engagement period for you and your wife. So tell us a little bit about how you met her and that journey, and a little bit about your family today. What you can share. I would love to hear a little bit more about that, because it sounds like it was a pretty fierce engagement period.
Yeah, yeah. So at the time, I was in Alaska, finishing up my former time in the military, and my now wife, she was working in Georgia as a pre-first teacher. And oddly enough, my wife's coworker at the time was my mom's college roommate. So just odd dynamic there. But the coworker reached out to my mom and asked if we could arrange a date whenever I come visit home on Christmas leave, traveling across the country. And then the coworker was bold enough to text my wife and say something along the lines of, "I know who your husband is." And so we had no idea of each other's existence, on this earth. And I'm in Alaska, she's in Georgia. We got my mom's college roommate trying to set us up on a blind date. So, sure enough, I come home 6 months later on Christmas vacation. And I think I was actually headed to planning to go to a funeral. And I was like, hey, I think I'm going to go ahead and try to set up just a stop in for coffee and meet this young lady. And and I really had no expectations. I was like, hey, this is probably not going to work geographically. I live on the other side of the world. I'm going to get out of the military and go move to Texas or something to go to seminary. So it's probably not going to work. Well, 2 hours later, I think I was drinking tea and she was drinking coffee. I think she was judging me pretty hardcore for drinking tea at a coffee joint. But anyways, all that to say, like we knew very quickly that it was the right, like this was it. Like she was my wife and I was her husband. And so 6 months later we were married. I think we were engaged within like 2 or 3 months. But pretty cool. I guess moral of the story is God can do some amazing things in geography and your current physical location. God can pull two people together that are very far away and don't even know of each other's existence.
Yeah. No, I appreciate you sharing that story. It really plays into kind of our focus for this month, and the reason we are having you on the show is it is Military Family Month in the month of November, and I would love to hear a little bit about how you navigate caring for your family and even what that's like for your wife now that she's married into the military. Because when you do marry a spouse that's in the military, it's like in some ways you're joining the military. So I'd love to hear a little bit about just what that's like and how you shepherd and care for your family, and then how your wife has transitioned into supporting you and being there, and even what it looks like for community that she has in her life to help her not feel alone in this season of serving in the military.
Yeah, great question. We're still figuring it out. We're doing it live. But my pastor and dear friend here, I think he says it the best. He says this, and I totally subscribe to this mentality, is instead of sacrificing my family on the altar of ministry, we make sacrifices as a family for the sake of ministry and the gospel. And so, no
That's
doubt in the
good.
military, specifically in the line of chaplaincy, there are times when I'm counseling a countless number of soldiers exhausted, walking through dark times of death with soldiers and our nation's heroes. But the sacrifices we make as a family. And I think that's key to how we are doing things, at least. And one pro tip that I'm currently still learning is self-care and boundaries. Outside of emergencies, we've recently made Saturday a dedicated family day, like non-negotiable. And we're very excited about that, just having one day set aside each week for our family to hang out together with no other obligations. And now under normal conditions, I'll only take 4 counselings per day. So that's 2 before lunch and 2 after lunch. And before, I implemented that, it was kind of out of control. And I was, not really setting up healthy boundaries for how many people I was, personally seeing every day. So just setting up healthy boundaries, implementing self-care techniques, whether that's healthy hobbies or just time for yourself. And then also just viewing ministry as a family decision and not just an individual decision of how I'm doing life here.
Yeah. And what about for your wife? Obviously those things you have set up for boundaries, but has she been able to develop community that can encourage her and support her as well as she faces the challenges of walking beside you?
Yeah, and that's been really important for her. She's got, I would say, 3 or 4 just very strategic, meaningful friendships with some ladies out here, and that has proven to be a source of life, a place for her to recharge. She goes to a women's prayer group every Monday night, and so there's intentional and strategic relationships that we've intentionally, that she's strategically intentionally made out here to help her just have that sense of community, which community is, ironically enough, I think one of the most challenging aspects of the military life because we move so often. And so been very proud of my wife and her ability to connect with women out here.
You mentioned that challenge that you guys face in finding community. How could our listeners, other believers, the community of faith do a better job in supporting our men and women in uniform as they move from location to location around our nation and around the world?
Yeah. Well, I think it's one of the greatest challenges for military families. Inherently moving every 2 to 3 years is challenging. By and large, moving is stressful. Finding a new house, settling in a new house can easily take 6 to 9 months. Finding community, establishing new local uplifting friendships and relationships. I mean, this all takes a lot of time. And that's time even if you're being intentional about it, uprooting your family support system. I think in 12 years I've moved 6 times out of state. And so one aspect that, as I think about, your listeners, your network, community networking, perhaps, if a family were to come to you and say, hey, we're moving from Georgia to Alaska, or to North Carolina, or from Hawaii to Colorado, or from New York to Louisiana, or whatever, as that family is taking care of all the stressors of moving, perhaps your organization could help reach out to that new city, perhaps local churches, and find some local recommendations and encouragement for them to get plugged into a local community. I mean, essentially, kind of talking about like sponsoring a family during that transitional period of time,
Yeah.
and helping them to connect in a new area. Maybe, that's something that y'all could focus on, helping families transition to a new church community or something like that.
Yeah, it's very interesting. I have some friends. My wife, too, went to West Point to the military academy and served in the United States Army. And it's so I can relate a little bit to your story, but I have friends and acquaintances that I know. And one of the things I've seen them navigate is quickly plugging into church, and how much that helps by finding a community quickly. Is that something that you would encourage, as far as if anybody who's listening that's is in the military, that they quickly plug into a local community and not delay that?
Yeah, I mean, I would make it top priority to try to get connected relationally with other like-minded believers. And I think one of the practical places to do that is inside of a church and finding a church community. So, so it's definitely something I would recommend families make top priority, is whenever you're at the assignment you're at right now, and you're thinking 6 to 12 months in advance or something like that. Start looking for, what churches might we attend, or what church might we attend that has active small groups, that has community life, that's involved in the community. And and I would just say yes,
Yeah.
absolutely. Short stroke to your answer or to your question.
No, it's I'm so thankful for Paul and his heart in connecting men with other men. That is really one of the things that's led us into our small groups that we have, for men, knowing that men are often in places where it's hard to connect with others. So one of the
Yeah.
things we've tried to do is offer online groups. We hope to continue to grow this as men plug into different areas. We know that transition can be really hard as you're finding a church. You have a demanding schedule oftentimes when you're making that transition, with lining up your housing and taking care of your family, getting your kids enrolled in school, all that goes into any move. And we want to do everything we can to help men stay connected to brothers in Christ, knowing that whenever you make that transition, it can often be very difficult. Even now, we have a guy who's in one of our groups who is transitioning from Georgia out to Colorado. And it's been great because in the middle of our season, he couldn't commit to a group in person, but he could commit to an online group, staying connected to the relationships here while he builds the relationships in his new location. So it is our heartbeat to help create a culture where men can connect, and we want to see that because we know how important it is. We believe it's one of the greatest things missing in most men's lives is healthy relationships. So thank you for pointing that out, and we want to do all that we can to support that. As we think about that and think about those groups, and you mentioned the transition and the difficulty that are faced. Do you think, what do you think is the greatest challenge facing our men and women in uniform today. Do you think it is that community, or is there something else that stands out to you that is one of the biggest challenges they're facing?
Yeah, that's a good question. If I were to only give one answer to like what is the greatest challenge, I would say it's inherently the moving every 2 to 3 years, because you're uprooting relationships, you're uprooting the family, and to continually have to do that time and time again, I would say is just kind of one of the inherent great challenges of living the military life. So any way to shorten the gap
Yeah.
between transition from one community to the next, whether that's preemptively reaching out to churches and pastors and like-minded communities, anything you can do to reduce that time in transition would be helpful to any military family, especially one with a gospel-centric or Christ-centric worldview.
Awesome. You also mentioned that you had a period where you struggled with depression and the stress of being deployed and what you faced there. And as a chaplain, I know you navigate that all the time. What have you learned yourself about helping people navigate through depression? And even what advice would you give maybe some of our listeners who are struggling with depression?
Yeah, it's quite prevalent. Depression is, and for me, having experienced it personally, has, long term been beneficial as I counsel so many that are actively dealing with depression. And so, going back to my bout with it, it was a turbulent time in life coming back from war, as it often is with many. Reintegrating into society. I personally was coming out of a failed relationship, questioning my career choice, not content, lonely, and personally sometimes falling into medicating depression with sin. And gosh, I'd like to say that I'm like super proud of how I dealt with it all in depression, but I really can't. It wasn't like a clean 1 + 2 = 3 process. It was more like cleaning a wound with sandpaper type of a process. So not easy, a lot of painful nights and tears. During that time, I had, like I was mentioning, my one chaplain buddy that I spoke with. I had a mentor as well that I spoke with occasionally, and one friend that I hung out with sometimes. But other than that, I did a lot of journaling and talking with God, crying out to God quite literally, that He would help me to discover what I was to do with my life if I were to keep living, because I was in a pretty dark place. So it wasn't all like roses and rainbows in the months to follow up battling depression and really kind of coming out of depression and loneliness and coming through it. I had some other just like life challenges. My house was literally flooded in 3 to 4 feet of water during a flash flood. I lost all my material possessions. A friend and coworker, passed away traumatically next door to me, and I basically all but failed out of the military course that I was in at the time. So things were like not easy, even coming out of depression. But through time and perseverance and a lot of time talking with God, often while I was either fishing or hiking, truly, I got strong confirmation that I was supposed to take a huge leap of faith to leave the Army, my source of income, my job, what I knew as stability, and step into the unknown. And kind of full circle to me, that looked like the road to Army chaplaincy. And so advice for those that are currently dealing with depression: one is this: if you're listening right now and you are contemplating suicide or ending your life because of what's going on, I would say this: don't make permanent decisions because of your temporary circumstances. Don't make permanent decisions because of your temporary circumstances, no matter how bad they are, those circumstances. I would just say, please, please, please give it time. Reach out to someone for help, and through time and prayer and letting life develop a little bit, letting the situation develop, life will get better in time. And so, the second thing is surround yourself with Christian friends and mentors. If you're dealing with depression, truly be vulnerable with Christian friends and mentors. That might look like you just going to a small group that you have no idea who the people are, but be vulnerable with these people, and they will help pull you out of depression, one, and two, just hold you up in times of depression. A third thing I would say, if you're dealing with depression, having coping strategies that are healthy, healthy hobbies, healthy habits is very important. So journaling your thoughts is good because it helps you cognitively process what's going on. And then kind of the flip to that is just not medicating with alcohol or utilizing destructive coping habits. Oftentimes we're just self-destructive in times of depression. And so if you can avoid self-destructive habits and have healthy hobbies, habits, and coping strategies, that's always a good thing. And the last two things I would say, one is, I guess number 4 here is just go get counseling, like professional counseling,
Yeah.
professional Christian counseling, like totally go and do that. Humble yourself and go find, I mean, I've personally done it. I currently see a counselor once every month just to level the bubbles. And I would say, go find a good Christian counselor. All counselors are not the same. So if you have a bad experience, that's okay. Like go find another counselor. There will be a counselor that you'll connect with. And if you need acute situational medication for an acute time of grief and loss and whatever, I'm totally not opposed to saying like, hey, if you need some medication, if there's a chemical imbalance, like, hey, let's talk about acute situational medication as well. And then lastly, and I think most importantly, is I found it very helpful to simply read the Bible, maybe getting on an annual reading plan with reading scripture and filling your mind and your soul with the Word of God, and seriously listening to, following, and ultimately releasing control to Holy Spirit who lives inside of us as Christians. I mean, and He will be your comforter in those times of depression. I mean, some of the most precious times that I've had with the Lord have been in my most down and out moments, relying on the Holy Spirit to comfort me and guide me during those times. So hopefully that's a good blend of what I would just say is practical and spiritual advice for those dealing with depression. It's very real, and there's definitely intentional strategies you can take to start to navigate your way out of depression.
No, that's great. Thank you so much for that advice, but then also sharing your own journey with depression. And I could not agree more about the Christian counselor. If you have a bad experience, it's often like finding a church or any relationship we have. So you can't just base it on that first time. It's often about that connection. So could not agree any more on that. Go find one and look. There's a lot of people out there willing to help. There's a lot of resources available. And, if there's any of our listeners who are struggling and we can help in any way, please reach out to us because we want to be able to assist you and never want anybody to feel alone in this season because, like you said, it is real and many people face it at different times in their life. So thank you so much for sharing that. You mentioned that you like to go fishing and hiking. Is that your favorite thing to do to kind of get a reset to check out? What's your pastime of choice?
Yeah, so fly fishing is definitely a hobby that I've picked up over the past, I don't know, a decade maybe, but I like going out fly fishing. The therapy of just standing in the river, listening to the sound of the river, and just kind of being alone with God and having that time to connect with Him has proven to be very meaningful for me. And but obviously, having a family and kids, like going on a fly fishing trip or going, spending an entire afternoon or morning out at the river is not always something that you can do like more than, for me, maybe more than just like once a month or something. So having little moments of ways to decompress or relax. I like to go to the sauna. Having worship music going in the background is something we do daily at our house. And personally, for me, singing brings victory and joy. I'm not a good singer, but
Oh, I
in
thought you
my
were going to
spare,
give us a little bit of
yeah,
singing for our listeners.
a little tune. No, but it's like it's one of those things, and I think there's biblical principle in that too. Rejoicing to the Lord. And so that's something I do. Eating well, just simple stuff like eating well, treating myself to dinner, or just simply getting enough sleep is a great way to kind of like set yourself up for success and be able to have relaxing days. I mean, there's practical aspects, but I I like shooting firearms. I like, other little things like just enjoying a good cup of coffee in the morning. It's just a little pleasure that is helpful to relax and just decompress.
Yeah. No, that's great. I think one of the things that always amazes me with my spouse having served in the military is that military currently makes up less than 1% of our population. Most of people have not served in the military, and a lot of people don't even know somebody who's serving in the military. Do you think that impacts how we relate to those in the military? And do you think that there's a certain way that our culture could be better at caring or being aware of what you guys face?
Well, I think at the end of the day, I think the opposite is true, right? Like for someone who's served their entire adult life in the military, feeling like they don't connect with people who haven't served in the military. So I'd say the inverse is also sometimes true. But for me, just always remembering and trying to view every person like we are all like designed in God's image, and on a humanistic level, it's like, hey, like I might have struggled in my ways in the military, but even if I'm talking to a civilian, I can all but, guarantee that they've had some very real struggles in life circumstances. And so to answer your question, just remembering that regardless if it's a soldier or not a soldier, like we're all human, and we might all have different occupations and experiences, but at the end of the day, we can connect on a human level that I think is very meaningful and powerful. Now, I'd say that the difficulty of that is vulnerability, right?
Yeah.
And so often, especially as men, we like to put on this facade that everything's good and then we have life all together. And that's been one of the biggest challenges, that I see here working here is just breaking through that shield of protection of like, hey, I have it all together, and really in asking the right questions, asking open-ended questions, and listening, asking about someone's hobbies, their passions, their family, their hopes for a future. I mean, asking very strategic questions, trying to break through that defense. And I think regardless of if you're in the military or not in the military, that's a technique that I like to utilize when trying to connect and understand other people. Just talking about listening to their hobbies, their passions, their future, their faith, their worldview, asking the right questions has proven to be very helpful for me. Did that even answer the question?
No, honestly, that's excellent because I think what you brought out about the humanity of remembering that at the end of the day, we all face some of the same challenges. It may look a little bit different due to the uniform that we wear or what we face, but there's commonality all across and throughout humanity. So I think that's great. Just engaging with people, asking questions, taking time to get to know them, find out what they're facing, and honestly just caring. So I think that's
Yeah.
perfect. You mentioned that you went to West Point to the military academy. And so I have to ask, is there a favorite memory that you have in that time? Because my wife's always sharing stories about our time. And honestly, I think she thinks everybody's experience is the same as the academy. And I'm like, there's no similarities between what you did at the academy and what I did in my 4 years in college.
I guess as I reflect back on my time at West Point, you know, the best memories that I have of the academy are the friendships and the experiences that I had with the college ministry up there. And I was involved. I was a baseball player up there, so I was involved with sports. I really struggled academically. I mean, there's a funny story that I remember. I don't even know why, but it was like my first 6 months at West Point, and I remember literally I had failed every assignment for like the first month, and I was like, I'm about to flunk out of this place, like no doubt. And I remember asking one of my teammates. I mean, this is how bad it was. Asked one of my teammates. I was like, down in our team room, and I was writing a paper, and I asked him, I was like, hey, what is a thesis statement? Because I had no idea. And he looked at me like, are you kidding me right now? Like, this is where you're at? And so I was like baselined, like outside of my comfort zone, no doubt. And I had to get a lot of academic help to keep up. And so my memories of West Point are, getting to travel with the baseball team, but baseball, I think, in a lot of ways was, I think, long term where I put most of my identity. And so as that career or that, sport came to an end for me, that was a challenging time. And so, but my best memories at West Point were definitely I Am Second, college ministry, doing mission trips with some of the baseball team and some of the ministry out to Nicaragua. We'd go out to New York City and serve some of the homeless people. And so that was, as I reflect back on what seems like another life ago to me, those are some of the experiences that stand out.
Awesome. Thank you for sharing that, Chaplain. And thank you for your service to our country and everything that you do on a daily basis to care for the men and women in uniform. I don't think we understand completely what it's like for you on a day-to-day basis, and we appreciate what you do. We're praying for you. We're praying for our men and women in uniform and all that they face, and we're thankful for the families who sacrifice and give and plan and readjust and transition time and again, and often are without one of the parents, the kids that face that. And it's just, we truly are indebted to you guys and what you do. And thank you so much. The last thing I would love to do is just some rapid fire questions. So these will be a little bit fun. So just relax, answer kind of the first thing that comes to mind. Favorite book?
I'm reading one Bible, there you go. But I'm reading one right now. I'm reading one right now. It's called One at a Time. And I don't even remember the author, but it's an orange book. And I recommend it because it talks about how Jesus, he focused on one person at a time, and and story after story of how Jesus did that. And I really like that as a counselor and as a chaplain. Favorite book right now is One at a Time.
Awesome. You were definitely a pastor. You shared for about a minute on your favorite book. So we don't need to get you preaching here.
Yeah.
Your favorite food?
Avocados, eggs, cheese, and steak all together.
Awesome. The best place you've ever visited?
Oh, Alaska.
Favorite season?
Fall.
And what word do you hate hearing?
Oh gosh, I cannot stand the Army word hua. When people say that word, I just cringe, and I don't even think it's a word, and it has too many meanings, and I cringe when I hear that word or that statement.
And last but not least, your favorite verse?
I would have to say that my favorite verse in all of Scripture is Romans 12:2. Do not be conformed by the ways of this world. Instead, be transformed by the renewing of your mind so that you may know God's perfect and pleasing will for your life. And I might have misquoted it, but it's right there. It's pretty close. But that has been a verse that stuck with me for so long. The importance of renewing your mind daily. So yeah.
No, great way to end. Love that thought on renewing your mind. We all can use that and take that to heart as we end today's discussion. Thank you so much, Chaplain, for joining us. Thank you for taking time out of your busy schedule. And again, we thank you for all that you do for our nation, and best of luck. God bless.
Thanks, Nate. Take care.